Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome back to Comedian MTG. My name is Ian, and today you're going to see my tournament breakdown of most likely my memeiest deck run of all time. This is perhaps the silliest thing I've ever done in cEDH, and it was a great time. I knew ever since the Spongebob Secret Lair got printed that as soon as Spongebob was revealed, I had to play it in cEDH, no matter what the cost might be to my mental health and sanity or the mental health and sanity of my opponents. The meme was just too good, everybody. And if it wasn't dirty from wearing it on the day of, I had a very SpongeBob-y shirt that I was wearing. I actually had one of my one of the players in the tournament walk up to me and goes, "Oh, your shirt's giving off little SpongeBob energies today." And I was like, "Well, you'll never guess what I'm playing." But Joe to the Unifier, aka SpongeBob, SquarePants was the commander I played. Now, I will read Joe to the Unifier's text, but the funny part about this deck is it is extremely irrelevant. I did a little bit of experimenting to see like, hey, can I make this like Joda plan like kind of base? Can I like really go for some crazy stuff here and like cascade legends into legends? But the more I messed around with it, the more I experimented with it, the more I realized like a lot of the really cool lines that were available for Joda were a pre-Dockside ban line. And to be honest, I like kept going and chuckling to myself at the idea of like, what if I just played SpongeBob, but it was just the most aggressive Turbo Nas deck in the entire world. And that is how I got my SpongeBob Turbo list known as Signifiers of the End Day 2.0. It's 2.0 because there was a much more Joda focused version that I played at one point, or I didn't play it, but I was experimenting with at one point, and it just was not it. It did not give me anything. So this is perhaps one of the most aggressive turbo decks you'll ever have seen me play in cEDH. And we're going to talk about the deck a little bit, and then I'm going to do a little bit of a tournament breakdown for you all to tell you about how somehow I kind of popped off with this deck. So let's read Joda. As I mentioned, I cast him once during the entire tournament as a body because I lost my engine and I needed something to do with my turn. But legendary creatures you control, and to be fair, like this first line of text I actually found to be quite relevant. Not during the course of the tournament, but as a backup plan, right? Basically, there's a backup beat down plan available in this deck, which I thought was kind of fun. But legendary creatures you control get +X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control, right? So if you have Joda and one other creature, right, one other legendary, suddenly all of your legends are getting +2/+2, right? So it scales pretty quickly, right? So it can really get out of hand, right? And then whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, which is the worst line of text on this card, and I'm so sad it says from your hand, exile a top card of your library, and so you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost and put the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's got like legendary cascade, but only from hand. Wow, if the not from hand part wasn't on this card, this deck would actually be kind of gas, but it is, and so SpongeBob was relegated to a Turbo Nas deck. Now, to illustrate what kind of Nas deck this is, I think there's some spice here that we can definitely talk about. But this deck has an ad Nas curve of 1.15. I'm pretty sure this is close to, if not the lowest ad nauseum curve I have ever played in a cEDH deck. To give you a hint, or to give you some description, the deck that played basically the mana value of the deck is 118, right? So like, mathematically speaking, you can draw a third of your deck with the ad nauseum in this list. So like the total mana value being 118 is pretty sick here, right? So very, very low to the ground, very fast deck. How are we winning with SpongeBob Turbo? And I will say, like, I did make some allusions to the fact that we are playing this deck, right? There's a couple legends. There's only, I believe, 7 throughout legendary creatures, being Rograk, which might seem spicy, might seem crazy to put Rog in the 99, but it actually kind of honked, right? Like it was a 0 mana body that I could sack to Culling Ritual, use for Mox Amber, all that kind of stuff. And it actually came up a pretty decent amount, not only in prepping for the tournament, but in some of the games itself, it could actually come up. Like having a 0-drop creature you can play post Necro, post Nas, etc. like actually does add up. Hope of Gearper, which I thought was awesome. Thought it was a really cool piece of tech that I was super proud of. Literally never drew it. That's tough. Basim, another one. I was really excited about that tech piece. Never saw that one either. Now, Valky, on the other hand, I'm going to talk about this one over the course of a couple games, but this was probably the MVP of the run. I'm not going to lie. This card actually cooked so hard. There were games where it stripped important creatures out of my opponent's hands, and there were games where it was a Gitaxian probe ×3 that allowed me to go, hey, am I safe to jam here? Or what should I be playing around? And I got the answers I was looking for through Valky. So big Valky fan over here. Definitely. Card just put in work. Holy cow. Bergie, obviously a super great card here. Voice of Victory, amazing card to put in these decks. Not really much more to be said about that. We've got Arthas's Oracle lines in the deck using Demonic Consultation or Tainted Pact to remove our entire library. As I mentioned, Culling Ritual, one of the best reasons to be playing green in a turbo deck, not to mention things like Tinderwall, Elvish Spirit Guide, etc. Super happy with how Culling Ritual performed. It definitely gets you out a lot of binds that you don't necessarily have the same tools for in Sans green lists. Meme Bet put in a lot of work too. We'll talk about that later in a little bit. I think some people are a bit lower on the card in the current format, but I'm enjoying it quite a lot. One thing you'll notice in this deck too, very light on interaction. I will say I have a couple. I got my pact, my offer honestly used as much proactively to counter my own stuff post Nas, post Necro, as much as it was used reactively to like defend my stuff, right? But no Force of Negation, no Mind Break Trap, right? These cards were not helping me zoom. They're not helping me go fast. And you know what? I said, no thanks. Don't need them. I want to go fast. We have Intuition here for the classic Intuition piles with Savine's Lines at Diamond, Underworld Breach. Speaking of which, Breach being one of our main win cons, if not the main win con of the deck. If you want to be going fast in this format right now, Breach is a great way to do it. On Necro Alliance with 3 enablers for Flash, right? We have Final Fortune, which is not a Flash enabler, but allows you to take an extra turn with Born Upon the Wind and Valley Floodcaller. I think I only executed one full Necro line in the course of the tournament. The rest of them were ad nauseam or just raw Breach lines, if I'm not mistaken, which is pretty sweet. And yeah, this is, I cannot tell you enough. 5-color Jam It Turbo, right? 27 lands. The hope is you never have to play your commander. There's a lot of like actual subtleties that went into this deck and a lot of very specific choices for the current metagame, right? The choice of, now that we don't have access to a cheap commander, no Furious, no Deflecting Squad, the fact that we're on Bobble for that reason. Being on Defense Grid versus Grand Abolisher came up multiple times. And it's really important in a deck like this because when you are playing all 5 colors, the idea that you just have double white, a color that is not contributing to the turbo plan whatsoever, is sort of ludicrous, right? Like you're not going to have that, right? So Defense Grid very early on helped out a whole ton. And if you'll notice, going up here to the creature section, there's no Ranger Captain, right? Like despite being in white, I'm not playing Ranger Captain of Eos, one of the best silence effects ever printed, because guess what? Double white sucks, right? Like the only pips that I want multiple colors of are 1, Oracle, because we're not going to cut Arthas's Oracle, right? And 2, the only other double pips are in black, where we have Beseech and Necro and Adnaz and many pieces in the deck. I guess also Final Fortune, worth noting. But these are all pieces that are very heavily supported by this idea of like we're Grixis core with multicolor extensions to the deck, right? So we're not trying to go insanely crazy for other parts of the strategy, but we are trying to push enough to go forward. Didn't really see the One Ring that often, but definitely still a very good card. I still think it's probably worth including in the deck, especially because you have no inherent card advantage to playing Jodah. And if you do, the One Ring at least cascades if you have your commander out, which is pretty funny. There was a whole permutation of this deck where I was like, oh, well, maybe I can play 2 legends in the deck and only 2 legends. And then they like one cascades into the other one, right? And I thought that was like, oh yeah, cool. I can assemble like 2-card legendary combos as long as one has a higher mana value, right? But then a couple things stop me from doing it that way. One of the big things is that you lose Mox Opal and Mox Amber for those combos, right? Which is very, very awkward to be able to be like, all right, cool, going for my combo. And then, oh, right, I hit a Mox Opal and it fizzles it, right? So one of the other reasons I didn't go for a more super spicy version of Joda that has like a random 2-card legendary combo is because it just has a upsetting amount of anti-synergy here. Apart from that, let me know if you have any other questions about the deck list in the comments down below. There's a lot of things in here that, as I said, overperformed. I think there's a lot of really cool stuff that happened over the course of this tournament. And I ended up doing very well in this tournament, as you probably already know from the thumbnail. And I was kind of baffled in a very fun way. I think, obviously at the end of the day, a 5-color turbo deck is a 5-color turbo deck, but it definitely performed way better than I thought it was gonna, and I'm very happy of the shell on the inside of the deck that allowed it to support kind of this crazy game plan we had going on. It was very fun too to see myself sit down with Spongebob. There were so many really genuine cool reactions from people I was playing against. People were just excited to see the deck, or people who were peers and people who I play against quite a lot being like, what are you cooking with today? And then this idea of this sort of anti-joke that was just this is actually just the most turbo deck I think I've ever piloted. But yeah, let's talk about how I lived the dream of almost going undefeated with SpongeBob SquarePants.
Are you ready, kids?
Aye, aye, Captain!
I can't hear you!
Aye, aye, Captain!
Oh!
Okay, so we go to round 1, where I am second. Glarb is in seat 1. It's me in seat 2. In seat 3, we have Liberator, the Flash Artifact Commander. And in seat 4, we got the wonderful bear themselves, Lumra. So really interesting round right to the start, right? So I do have a bunch of notes from this. So if you see me looking like I'm reading, it's because I'm reading my own notes. I keep a hand this first round. So a couple things are running through my head, right? Glarb in C1. Glarb is a very interactive deck, right? But I'm also looking at the other 2 decks in the pod, and I'm seeing Liberator, which is a deck that plays a decent amount of stacks pieces, but doesn't have stack interaction, right? And until Liberator is out, the deck is sort of operating at 60 to 70% capacity, right? When Liberator's out, it starts really cooking, right? And Lumra, which inherently is a very parasitic deck, but a very greedy deck, right? It's a deck that really doesn't interact too much with the table. It just does the Lumra thing, right? So I know that, at least from the Lumra perspective, not really seeing a whole bunch, which means unless Liberator gets a super crazy start, I'm really contending with Glarb for interacting with my plan, right? The things that are actually going to disrupt me. And so I keep a hand that I'm pretty geeked on, right? Because it's 2 mana dorks, a Voice of Victory, a Manamorphose, a Diabolic Intent. So basically this hand, and the one of the dorks specifically was a Tinderwall, right? So I'm in this point where I basically get to go turn 1, play a mana dork, turn 2, plays a Voice of Victory and a mana dork, and then turn 3, I can sack the Tinderwall, Manamorphose the mana to turn it into black mana, Diabolic Intent, and I should be able to jam an Adna as early as turn 3, while uncounterable with the Voice of Victory, which is pretty sick, right? Voice of Victory also providing me the bodies to sacrifice for Diabolic Intent to then go tutor through my library, right? So this hand's kind of got it all going on, right? So I do the thing. I'm doing exactly how I want to start, right? Glarb just land passes. I'm like, all right, they're probably up to some shenanigans in some way, right? Then I play a dork, pass the turn. Liberator plays the Stone of Erech, which is this weird card from Lord of the Rings. Basically says whenever a creature would hit the yard from the battlefield, gets exiled instead, and then they can pay 3 to nuke a graveyard, right? So it's definitely something I'm cognizant of, but they have to have 3 mana available for that to become a problem for me, right? So that's something I'm paying attention to. And then Lumra does the Lumra thing. They play a land, they play a Zurin Orb, they play a Lotus Petal, and they're just like, all right, cool, pass, do bear stuff, right? Glarb tutors a Dark Ritual, slams a Necropotence. I'm like, uh-oh. We could just die before I get a chance to do any sort of shenanigans. We could just be cooked, right? They slam Necro, but they don't play a land for a turn, right? So they're stuck on 1 land. And I'm like, okay, I'm a little bit safe from that just absolutely wrecking us, right? I basically give myself a turn in that situation. They do, I think, like a modest necro. They get like 7 cards in. They sculpt the hand a little bit, go to exile, etc. I play voice. No answers for that. Great, feeling good. And I play a mana dork. Now, where things get a little wonky for yours truly is Liberator untaps and slams a Tabernacle. And I'm like, oh, there goes my entire game plan, right? I don't have enough if I sacrifice these creatures. Basically, I'm doing the math and I'm like, okay, I can sack the Tinder Wall for 2 mana to keep my Voice of Victory and my Mana Door. Because I think if I lose my Voice of Victory, I have no real advantage against this Glarb with the Necropotence, right? So I know I'm in trouble there. And yeah, that's just, it's real bad to see the Tabernacle. But one positive is that because Liberator's investing in Tabernacle, which is disrupting me, don't get me wrong, it's throwing me off pretty hard tempo wise, but it also means they're not investing more into their board state, which means they're not holding up mana for this exile thing, which means my graveyard's somewhat okay, right? Lumra does another like tap land, bear stuff, whatever. It'll make sense in a little bit, but Lumra's doing Lumra things, trust. Gets back to Glarb. Glarb plays a Birds of Paradise and then cranks deep into Necro. Still nothing. They whiff on land again. Well, I mean, they can't instant speed play a land, but they're not doing anything like, Born, whatever. They're just holding up a direction, sculpting a hand a little bit. They didn't go too deep the second time around because once again, they're just looking for land drops, right? So they get a couple of cards. It's kind of clear to me that they've got a land at this point. So popping off with that a little bit, right? And then also, shout out to the fact that, Max, who is the Glar player, is someone I've worked with multiple times. Super cool player, and actually ended up top 16 in this tournament, too, which is pretty sweet. Anyways, so going into this, I do what I said I was going to do. I sack the Tinderwall. I pay for my 2 creatures. I go to combat. I attack Max with the Voice of Victory. He blocks with the Birds of Paradise because he's like, I'm just going to pay 1 to sack it to Tabernacle anyways. Like, doesn't matter. I'm like, sure, fair enough. Or pay 1 to not sack into Tabernacle, I should say. And so it blocks there, but I get the 2 warriors from Voice of Victory. I use 1 to Diabolic Intent. And here's where I mess up, and I'm super happy to admit this. I super beefed it at this point. I have 4 mana available to me, right? And I'm like, okay, I got to play around the stone, but I still think if I go for an uncounterable breach line, the odds of him having 3 mana up are pretty low. Let me just go grab Underworld Breach, right? And I have like 3 or 4 cards in my graveyard. I have no ability to like put the cards, like the creatures, if they die, they go into exile, right? Because of the Stone of Eric. And I'm like, okay, yeah, let me just go grab a breach here. And like my math is off, right? Like it was not a great moment for me as far as like mental math there. But I still can sort of assemble something. I'm just like making it really hard for myself. But the other problem is like, what do I go grab a Necropotence and then be the worst Necro deck at the table and then like have to still pay for some stuff? It gets messy there, right? So I'm like, let me just grab the breach. It's the cheapest line I have to win. And I'll hold up this Manamorphose. And then hopefully by putting a card in the graveyard, and hopefully Manamorphose gets me something to basically supplement the breach plan. So it wasn't like completely like I was not just going to do anything, but like I definitely needed some assistance from the Manamorphose to like give me something, right? Pass to Liberator. Liberator taps out for some mana rocks so that next turn we know like they're going to start doing the whole flash in the Liberator thing, hold up a bunch of mana, do the blah, 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 blah. We go to Lumra's turn. Lumra is looking scary. They're able to sack all their lands to Zurin Orb after floating a bunch of mana, play Lumra, get a bunch of lands back. They mill a pretty decent amount of cards. They get a Gaia's Cradle into play. They get a Strip Mine into play. There's a lot of very scary lands that come into play for Lumra. So Lumra is looking pretty intimidating. If they get another turn cycle, they just don't have that missing ingredient for anyone who hasn't played against a lot of Lumra. Basically, any of the pieces that allow their lands to come in untapped. So like an Amulet of Vigor, or there's the Tiller engine that does the same thing. There's also the Spelunking card from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. Basically, any of these pieces that say when your lands come in, they come in untapped, makes Lumra just absolutely go buck wild and basically win the game instantaneously, right? So they don't have that, but they get a ton of advantage by playing Lumra and Zurin Orbing, and they're up to like 48 life or whatever. Like they're just popping off of Lumra, but they're not winning. They're just getting a lot of advantage. So at this point, goes back to Glarb's turn. Glarb finally plays land and digs relatively deep with Necro. Not enough to like kill the table, but they're down to like 15 life at this point. So, getting a little scary, but like sculpting a responsible hand is basically at this point. Importantly, though, at this point, Lumra has specifically played Lumra, and when Talon Gates came in, they were just kind of like, yeah, I don't know, phase away your voice of victory, right? So it actually phases out for the turn cycle, meaning that Glarb actually doesn't have a chance to, at main phase at sorcery speed, remove the voice of victory, right? So it ends up being kind of a mistake from our Loomer player, because they basically gave my voice of victory a sorcery speed protection during Glarb's turn, which ends up mattering a little bit, right? Basically, Glarb would have had to have made the choice to play Glarb on the turn and Deadly Rollick Voice of Victory only to have it sacked to Tabernacle, which is pretty rough, right? Given their mana situation, and also the fact that there was a lot of other stuff like going on as far as that, and then like not being able to like draw more cards. Basically, it would have been really, really bad to have to invest in Glarb just to Deadly Rollick it anyway, so he wasn't even sure if that was what he was going to do on the turn. And that's also if he found the land too, right? So there was like a whole layers on layers and layers and layers and layers thing, and I think I don't remember how he would have done. I think maybe there's an Elvish Spirit Guide. So basically, he would have had to throw his entire hand away just to get Glarb on the field to hit the voice victory, right? So it's not sure. He wasn't sure like if that was actually what was going to happen in the course of that turn, but we didn't ever get to find out because the Talon Gates gave the voice victory inadvertent protection, basically. So in that end step, after the Necro thing happens, I just fire off my Manamorphose. And everyone's kind of like, okay, like just waiting to see if I do anything crazy with it. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna float like a blue and a black mana. And they're like, yeah. And then I rip the card with Manamorphose, and it's actually Lion's Eye Diamond, which I don't know if I could have had a better hit in this situation. But like as I mentioned, a lot of cards supplemented this plan to the point where I was at least cooking a little bit. LED just made it kind of that I could just shut my brain off and go, okay, cool. Breach Lion's Eye Diamond, get the tutor back, sack one of the Voice of Victory tokens, go grab my Brain Freeze, GG's, right? So that made it nice, clean, and easy for me. And the LED was definitely a nice break, right? And I will say over the course of this tournament, I'm traditionally not a very lucky player. I definitely had some moments where I will recognize luck. That was absolutely a luck moment. As I said, there were a number of outs that I could still draw in that moment that still like got me in a good situation, but LED was definitely like the best thing that could have happened. This is one of two moments in this tournament where I was like, oof, okay, yeah, I got lucky there. Maybe three, actually. But either way, 5 color good stuff pile, sometimes you're going to hit high, and this was one of those moments, right? So felt very good starting the tournament 1-0. As I said, I kind of went into this tournament with the idea of like, playing a 5-color turbo deck. We're gonna have fun with it. I'm really just here to play SpongeBob, and I think it's very funny that I'm doing so. That's the extent of what I was expecting from going into this event, right? I want to shout out some events that I'm going to be at in the near future. We got the Salt City cEDH convention. On my last video, I mentioned that they dropped $100 off of their ticket entry. And it's not just a cEDH tournament, it's a cEDH convention, right? So there's a bunch of perks that you can get access to, which once again, I will leave in the description of this video if you want to attend this event. But it's a cEDH 10K. All the prizing is available, and you can see it right up on the screen right now. Some really crazy stuff out in Utah, and it's going to be a super sweet time out in Salt Lake City. Come check it out. It's the end of the month, May 24th and May 25th out in Utah. Come check it out, Salt City cEDH Con. I will also be attending the Steel City Spectacular as a featured guest. This is a $20,000 cEDH tournament that's being held from August 14th to 17th. Now, if you're a lover of cEDH, or if you're someone who's playing other formats but wants to be in a room where people are playing cEDH, there's a bunch of different tournaments going on with this event. This is just the cEDH main event. It's being run by the folks at Excalibur Events, who are a new company, but they have some familiar faces who are running some things. And so there's a lot of really cool stuff online. They also did a giveaway on a bunch of different social platforms for like a Mox Pearl. So go check out Excalibur Events if you want to jump on their socials, because I mean you're gonna have something cool if you end up winning the giveaway. But as I mentioned, cEDH 20K. I don't really know what else to say about it, in the sense that like it is just such an amazing event already ready to be set up. They are trying to fill up the entire thing. I think it's going to be an insanely good tournament. And as I mentioned, the 20K is the main event, but there is going to be tons of stuff available. There's tons of featured guests. There's going to be creator corner areas. I won't be doing one personally, because I know when I'm in tournament mode, I don't really want to sort of mix those two realities. But it's going to be a great time. It's going to be a 3-day event in total, but the main event is going to be
or I guess 4-day event. So it's 14th and 17th, right? But the main event is the spectacular 20K cEDH event. As I mentioned, amazing featured guests, amazing time. This is going to be an insane tournament, and definitely one you're going to want to be there for. If you're any convinced that you want to throw your hat in the ring for a cEDH event, this is going to be the good one to go for. So it's going to be Pittsburgh, PA, August 14th through 17th.
So round 2. So in seat 1, it's Thrasios and Timna. Seat 2, Kenrith. And seat 3, Thrasios, Timna, and then me. Everyone kind of keeps like mana dork openers, right? Just a little, dork pass from everybody. My whole game plan is I have a dork, and I have another dork, and I have a Tainted Pact. And the idea is I'm just going to get a little bit of mana advancement. I'll Tainted Pact for one of my win conditions, and then boom, just send it, right? Keeps a hand that's like not super crazy, right? But like I'm advancing my plan a little bit, right? Like it's not super slow, it's not super fast. Definitely a medium hand, maybe not as fast going 4th seat, but like TNT, Kenrith, TNT, I'm like, I don't really need to like turbo in this pod, right? I can sort of do a medium speed thing, right? Kind of see what happens. And this Tainted Pact, I have no problem using Tainted Pact as a value Tainted Pact. I do it literally all the time. So we go around the table, play the dork, end step of turn 1, TNT in first position. I'll call them TNT 1 versus TNT 3, right? TNT seat 1, TNT seat 3. Or I can just say Matt and Ben, which may actually just make more sense. As you can see, their names are on the screen. So Matthew is TNT 1, Ben's TNT number 2. So Matt, being on TNT 1, goes into it and gets that Fairy Mastermind down, right? As we're going through the second turn cycle, Kenrith gets an Archivist of Ogma down, which, yeah, I cannot stress enough how many cards this Archivist of Ogma drew over the course of this game. And actually, I think there's some order of operations in which the Archivist was drawing more than the Mastermind, but I think it was literally because everyone was drawing like 1 card for the Archivist every turn and not 2. But yeah, this Archivist, I think, drew Lim like, I want to say 8 cards over the course of this game. It was pretty sick, right? So Archivist is cooking, right? So we get back to me for the end of my second turn, and I do a value Tainted Pact, right? And I'm a couple cards in, and my brain freeze flips over, right? But I'm looking at my hand, and one of the things you have to keep in mind when you're playing a turbo deck is that, like, yeah, you can lose resources. Now, I want to be clear. I built the deck in a specific way where, like, losing resources like brain freeze is not going to be the end of the world, right? I have Mnemonic Betrayal, I have Thassa's Oracle, I have different ways to still get out of these situations without needing brain freeze. It just sucks because Breach is my best win con. Unfortunately, I also don't have a backup Breach line, right? There's no grinding station, there's no culling the weak, stitch your supplier line, right? It is just brain freeze and also just manual storm stuff with the brain freeze, right? So that part's definitely a pain in the butt, but I move past the brain freeze, feel very sad about it. But then Mystical Tutor shows up, and after just losing one of my main win conditions, I'm not exactly going to try and get greedy, seeing as I've already lost a really important card, right? So I'm like, great, I'll grab Mystical Tutor on my upkeep, I'll Mystical Tutor for ad nauseum, and I'll put it on the stack, and we'll see what happens, right? Everyone's also a little bit lower in hands at this point. TNT just tapped out for a Bloom Tender, right? Like, stuff's happening, right? But no one's got a bunch of stuff, right? So I throw away my brain freeze for this Tainted Pact. I launch this Mystical Tutor, and it eats a mental misstep so quickly from TNT number 3. Yeah, which sucks super bad. So I get blown out there super badly. I have kind of nothing left at this point, right? I just have Valky, which one of the games where Valky comes in super, super hot, right? So I have Valky in hand, and then I've just got a Mana Dork and a Rite of Flame. That's literally it. So I play Valky because I'm going to do something as opposed to nothing, and I don't have enough mana to go to the backside of Valky, which is the Tybalt Planeswalker side. That also never came up over the course of this tournament, and it didn't matter because the front side of Valky put in work, right? So I play front side of Valky, and everybody reveals their hands, and wow, was the information I gained in this moment monumental, right? Kenrith is doing some generic Kenrith stuff. There's a Breach in there. There's a Mirror Maid, right? They're doing some good stuff, but they're not like immediately going to go like Breach thing, right? Like in this board, it's just not going to happen like that. The TNT in C1 reveals Tainted Pact plus Tutor and a Force Mitigation, right? No blue cards, importantly. But it's very obvious to me that Tainted Pact plus Tutor. I have a feeling I know what's going to happen over the course of the next turn, right? um, but specifically in their hand, they reveal a Orcish Bowmasters as well, right? And for those who've never seen Valky before, it basically gives you the ability to transition itself into one of the creatures that it exiles out of your opponent's hands, right? So I take the Bowmasters from TNT1. I don't remember what I take from Kenrith, but TNT in seat 3 reveals hands, and they have, to be clear, they have a bunch of mana. They have Timna, they have Thrasios at this point. They're doing some stuff. They got the Bloom Tender on the battlefield, and they reveal a Seedborn Muse, which I so quickly just yoink, get that out of there. I have no desire to absolutely just lose to this TNT slamming a Seedborn Muse down, right? So already Valky's putting in a bunch of work. It is now just able to become a copy of like Seedborn or Orcish Bowmasters or this other creature, which is escaping me because it was the least impactful at the moment. But I get to the point where I'm like, great, let's just do that. Right now, just to be clear, at this point, there is a Fairy Mastermind on the battlefield and there's an Archivist of Agma on the battlefield. And so I'm like, this is definitely becoming a Bowmasters, right? And, you know, it doesn't hurt that if you notice in my deck, I'm not running Bowmasters, right? Which is a choice I feel very secure about. It doesn't really do a lot to help my game plan, and therefore I didn't feel like I needed it. But getting an incidental copy of Bowmasters that at one point was my opponent's feels great. And also now I'll have an Orc army to sacrifice, et cetera, et cetera. So we go through the course of the turn, gets back to TNT seat 1. They very unsurprisingly fire off that diabolic intent, right? They're going to get Thassa's Oracle. We all understand what's going on here, right? Importantly, it is also revealed that my opponents are really low in interaction at this point, right? Like very, very few things. The only thing I know for a fact is that there's that Force of Negation from TNT in seat 1 with no blue card, right? So I'm basically assuming at this point, and once again, Kenrith has drawn some cards, right? But I've at least seen their most recent iteration of cards. And I know for a fact that there is no direct counterspells at the current moment. Same thing with TNT and seat 4. They've just got a lot of stuff that they're pushing for, right? Now, TNT seat 4 has also got a Wish Claw that they've played in the last rotation with this Bloom Tender on the battlefield, right? So obviously they're very threatening. So this Diabolic Tutor, or this Diabolic Intent gets fired off, which triggers the Archivist. So in response, I make my Valky into the Bowmasters and I shoot down the Bloom Tender because the TNT in C3, even though they lost their Seaborn Muse, still has a ridiculous amount of value going on, including this Wish Claw Talisman, right? And to be clear, my hand at this point is 2 mana dorks, Rite of Flame, right? That's it. We go through the course of the turn. Kenrith plays a little bit of value, doesn't go for the Breach Line because they don't have everything to slap it together. So they're just kind of holding up a little bit of mana and passing the turn. I think he invests into Kenrith the turn beforehand. So like did a little bit of combat shenanigans, end step flashes into Fairy Mastermind into someone else drawing. I try to shoot it with the Bowmasters. It gets a 1/1 counter on it. That we shoot down the Archivist at one point. There's just some Bowmasters, ping, 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 shoot stuff going on. I think a part of it was the TNT in seat 3. I had convinced to go to combat so that we could shoot down the Archivist. And I was like, yeah, you draw your card. I'll leave your Timna alone, but I want to shoot down the Archivist. Because Kenrith drawn, like, once again, like 8 or 9 cards off of this thing. It turns into a whole, like, ping, ping, ping fest, right? Because then, you know, obviously Fairy Mastermind, triggering out Fairy Mastermind. So, like, there are cards drawn since my last peak at everyone's hand, which is still in this turn cycle, right? But there's definitely information that's been gained and changed in the meantime, right? So the TNT player in seat 3 really wants to activate this Wish Claw, especially after losing their Bloom Tender, right? So goes Wish Claw activation, and I go, hey, look, I'll show you my hand right now. I have nothing, right? And it is. It's just 2 mana dorks and the Rite of Flame, right? So they immediately pass the Wish Claw to me. Also, the other 2 have like 8 cards in hand. They are in a way better position than I am. Specifically the TNT in seat 1. Oh, yeah. Also, I did mention that they have a Tainted Pact in hand. They, to be clear, do not have a black mana source up at this time, which does affect the current course of the way this game goes from this point on. Right. So I get the Wish Claw because the other 2 are like definitely not supposed to have the Wish Claw, right? There is a Breach and a Mirror Maiden and all that stuff in Kenrith's hands. And there is a supposedly Thassa's Oracle Tainted Pact plus Veil of Summer and a Force of Negation in TNT seat 1's hand, right? So I get the Wish Claw. TNT slams a Kinnan down. They invest into something else as well, and then they pass the turn, right? It's pretty clear that at this point, we think TNT is going to untap Basalt with Kinnan not in the battlefield. GG's, game over, right? So it gets to me. I go to my turn. I'm like, I really didn't see a lot of interaction, and I already lost my brain freeze, and I'd be kind of jamming on the main phase, and I'm kind of getting the impression that like if I go greedy here with this wish claw, I'm like, I have a feeling that I'm not going to eat that force of negation from TNT and Seat One because I don't think they're going to want to throw away their Thassa's Oracle in a deck that really, really relies on Thassa's Oracle. And they know I don't have a brain freeze. So the odds of me whiffing on a Nas are like a lot higher than they would be traditionally because I don't just have that easy breach line to go for here, right? And so I play the Rite of Flame. I also have an Lion's Eye Diamond at this point too, which is I totally forgot about until this literal second, even when I was writing my recap, right? So I go Rite of Flame, crack the LED for a bunch of black mana, and I crack the Wish Claw. And I go to pass it back to TNT in seat 3 because everyone else is absolutely a nightmare to pass it to, and even they're a nightmare to pass it to. But like, at least if things go horribly wrong here, I can at least go, okay, maybe we don't jam because that person is now has the chance to double tutor, right? They're also the farthest away in turn order. I'm basically giving myself the highest chance of survival. And I go to my opponents and I show them the Adnaz that's in my deck, right? And I go, I can either A, go grab this Adnaz and jam, which is my main plan right now. And I go, unless anyone's willing to show me a reason that I should go grab this One Ring instead. And everyone's like, I don't have anything to show you at this time. And I take that as a green light. I go, okay, cool. Put an Adnaz on the stack after obviously shuffling my library, right? Take the Adnaz, put it on the stack. I have literally nothing else, and it sticks. Everyone just pass, right? So I'm great. I start flipping through. And this is where this commander having a CMC the Adnaz curve of 1.15 comes into play, because even though I did not have access to my brain freeze, I was still able to draw something like 35, 36, 37 cards deep. I'm able to have a double protected breach line in which, yes, I don't ever go to brain freeze, but basically I'm able to go, I think, culling the weak, my mana dork that I have on the battlefield. I think it's a Birds of Paradise. So I'm like culling into a couple quick spells, into Cabal Ritual, make a bunch of mana. And at this point, I've just got like mana on mana on mana on mana. I've got the Pact back up. There's just like nothing that can stop me at this point. I just start ripping through cards. And I'm able to manually assemble a loop in which I just like chug through my deck until I get to my Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation and slam it down with, as I said, multiple pieces of protection. GG's. So definitely got kind of, it was an advantageous situation there, right? Definitely made a judgment call, basically with the information I was given from Valky. Valky put in a lot of work, and this is definitely something that like comes up thematically through the rest of this episode, in which like, what feels like potentially a bad window or a bad opportunity where my opponents could blow me out. Instead, the margins are so tight that I'm able to sort of navigate right over these tight margins with this 5-color deck, right? And I think that's a big part of what's making these turbo decks really interesting right now. People are setting up for the mid-range, they're investing in engines, and they're investing in grind pieces. And if everyone's investing in tutors and grind engines and all those things, the space for interaction sort of gets left to the side a little bit, right? And so there's this really interesting windows that get created over the course of these games where you can find opportunities in situations that like may not have previously been there, right? So there's all these like little holes and openings and things like that. And I kind of pulled it out for a situation, which, as I said, like super happy to go find a pivot there, but I was like, I'm gonna, put my toe in the water and see if I can just get away with this Nas, and I did, right? Which is great. So definitely happy about that one. So I'm starting the day 2-0. Want to thank one of our longest partners on this channel, and that is Heavy Play. I love using Heavy Play products. I have been using them for as long as we are partnered, and even longer. And legitimately, I was so excited when Heavy Play reached out to me because I adored their products, and I was so excited to get a chance to advertise a product I genuinely believe in. I am not paid at all by Heavy Play to go use their products at real events, but anyone who's played with me over basically the past year will know that I am always sitting there with heavy play deck boxes, heavy play dice trays. They're awesome play mats. They even have really cool play mat stores so that if you don't want to use the heavy play magnetic mats, you can actually have a magnetic setup that locks in your playmat nice and easy and allows it to actually be stored in your bags, things like that. It is a super sweet setup. They have brand new art magnetic mats. And if you're someone who cares about grinding cEDH at all, the convenience of their setup to have your dice, your tokens, all of that stuff so easily just magnetically equipped and ready and available for you at all times is absolutely amazing. I was actually able to see some really cool heavy play reps when I was at SEG and when I was at PAX. The team there is absolutely awesome to work with, and I cannot recommend the products enough. If you use code Comedian, you can get 10% off your order right now. And also, because of some tariff stuff, I'm pretty sure Heavy Play is currently at its lowest it's going to be in a really long time. So now is literally the best time you're going to be buying Heavy Play stuff for the foreseeable future. So go heavyplay.com, and if you use code Comedian, not only are you getting the lowest rates you're going to get for a while, but you're also going to get 10% off your order. Check out heavyplay.com/comedian. Round 3. I get to go in first seat against the other 2-0 players at the time. And so it is myself in seat 1. We got a Zerda in seat 2. It's pretty cool to see Zerda up at the top pods, the 2-0 pods at the time. Then in seat 3 is Kinnan. And in seat 4 is Sisay. And this is a game with such dramatic highs and lows. It's so crazy, right? So I start off with a hand that is kind of nuts. It's like land, Mox Diamond, Dork. Like everything you could possibly want with the ability to follow it up turn 2 with a Beseech the Mirror, right? So I'm literally able to go 4 pieces of mana turn 1, turn 2, Beseech the Mirror. I'm going to slam a Necropotence, and I'm going to send it because I'll be on the play turn 2. I won't like send it in the sense where I'm just going to like go for the 30 deep, but I will get a fresh 7 and go crazy from there, right? Pass to Zerda. Zerda plays Sensei's top. Very responsible, slow start for Zerda. It ends up making sense a little bit more as the game progresses. Kinnan does a thing where they Mox Diamond and then play something else to get their Kinnan out. I think it's like Mox Diamond into a Bird's Paradise, right? So they don't actually have a land for turn because they pitch their only land to the Mox Diamond, which does come up very relevantly. Now, Sisay at this point, as we found out afterwards, top decks the Lotus Petal that they need to play Lavinia turn 1. And so I'm sitting there staring at a hand that is Gamble and Beseech the Mirror. And Lavinia sticking is a nightmare for me because not only would the spell off Beseech get countered, but we're in a situation in which I can't even put Beseech on the stack because I have 1 land. I get BTFO'd by this Lavinia here. Really, really bad, right? And so I draw my card for turn, and I am like sweating buckets at this point, right? I draw a 1 ring, which also great engine. Still can't play it. So I'm sitting there, and I'm like, okay, what do I do here, right? And so my thought process is, and I might have drawn a 1 ring the turn after this. There's some configuration which I'm trying to remember exactly how this goes. I think I actually draw a land this turn and a 1 ring the turn afterwards. But I basically go, okay, what of my win conditions can win through Lavinia? And I'm like, I guess Breach, sort of. I can't put in Necropotence on the stack at all because I don't have the appropriate amount of lands, right? And so I could go gamble for a 50-50 shot at a removal spell and then try and Beseech, but I'm like, that's super risky. There's so many ways that goes wrong, and I'm also not on Snap, so I don't have any free removal spells, so there's no situation in which I gamble. And also, if I gamble, I can't play my land drop. There's no world where gamble is actually like getting me anything here, right? That I need. So I think I end up just gambling here for there's like one other card in my hand, I think, at this point, right? But I gamble for Demonic Tutor, right? And the idea is I'm just trying to put things in my graveyard so that when I go for a breach line later on, which does end up being actually pretty relevant. Yeah, fun fact, kids, if your breach lines are a little bit unstable, sometimes, for example, if you have like a mystical tutor, you want to set up a breach, getting another thing can help first, or like a vampire tutor, I guess is more accurate, or an imperial seal, right? Potentially, sometimes if you have the extra mana, putting the top deck tutor to grab a demonic tutor to then go grab the breach is actually sometimes a better line, because you set yourself up for when you actually stick the breach, now you have a clean tutor to go get your thing. Anyways, TLDR, I'm setting this up, but I'm doing kind of nothing at the same time, right? So they see me tutor for a tutor, right? To then play the breach in my hand, right? So here's where things get a little crazy. We basically pass around the table, and Zerda is getting to the point where they turn 2 play Oswald Fiddlebender. Turn 3, they're able to. They don't have enough mana to Oswald and play Zerda, right? And the idea is, once again, they have Sensei's Top on field, right? So if they Fiddlebender, they can sack the Sensei's Top to put Grim Monolith into play, right? So we go around the second rotation. Oswald's on the field. Kinnan sort of just plays Kinnan, passes with like one other dork. Sisei at this point goes and plays a Bloom Tender, which is obviously very scary from Sisei. Yeah, very, very scary situation indeed. So then it gets back to me. Yeah, I can't really do anything at this point, so I just play my Spongebob. I'm just like, whatever, here's my 5/5, enjoy, right? And so now we're at the position where Zerda plays the Fiddlebender. They basically hold up a little bit of mana, and they turn the Sensei's Top into the Grim Monolith, and there's an Oswald still in the battlefield. So we're all morbidly aware of the fact that if Zerda gets to untap, we are dead, right? Because the deck plays 1,000 outlets for the infinite colorless mana. If they get back to the turn, Zerda, infinite colorless mana, play outlet from hand, GG's, right? We are cooked. Kinnan doesn't really have anything. They, I think, show that they have a Flusterstorm, right, at this point. And I know I'm not winning through a Flusterstorm, right, with the situation I have at hand, but I'm also recognizing the fact that we are dead to Zerda, like, period. And so I look at Sisei in 4th seat, and I go, well, here's what we can do. If you sacrifice your Lavinia by swinging it into Spongebob, if you sacrifice your Lavinia into Spongebob, I can beseech the mirror for an answer to the board state, right? Now, what's really nice about this answer, and what's really ends up being really bad about this answer, is the fact that I can culling, right? I can go for culling ritual and blow everybody out, right? Kinnan has literally no lands, so they'll be set back to the Stone Age. Zerda has Oswald, Grim Monolith, and Sisei has the Lavinia and also like either the Bloom Tender or another Mana Dork or something like that. But the point is, a bunch of stuff that's going to get wiped out by the Culling Ritual, right? The problem is, we know that Kinnan has a Flusterstorm. And it's at this really weird point where Kinnan's like, hey man, listen, like, if this Culling Ritual sticks, I am down to literally nothing. Like, I have no resources. So we have a debate back and forth for a little bit, all very respectful, but like, I'm like, okay, what's the middle ground that we can find? Because I have nothing else with Beseech that I can go grab that's going to actually just deal with the problem, right? Like, and I'm also not going to go Beseech for an Abrupt Decay. Like, it's just not something I'm going to go do at this point, right? And so we basically figure it out to a position where they're like, all right, you can culling, but like, you can't win the game. And I'm like, fair, right? Like, that's a very reasonable midway conversation to get to, is like, I'm calling the week. And I go, okay, here's literally my plan with it. And I was like, I'm going to calling the week, and I'm going to play Heuristic Study out of my hand. Sound good, right? And everyone agrees, like, sure, let all the mana go away. And that's the situation we get to. Zerda has no say in it because yeah, they're tapped out Boros deck, right? And obviously they're the problem at the table at the time, right? So eventually we get to that common place of understanding. I fire off the Culling the Week. It is a monumental success. It makes like 13 mana. I then play a Mox Amber out of my hand, use that because I have Joda on the battlefield and Spongebob on the battlefield. I tap that for a blue, play Heuristic Study, let like 12 mana very sadly pass, but I'm also not going to go back on my word. That's how I am as a player, right? So let it happen. So I have, but the thing to recognize here too is like, I only have now a Breach in hand, this Heuristic Study, feel great about that part, right? But I have 2 lands now because a lot of my mana sources were also non-land mana sources in this situation. So instead of calling the week, basically, or calling ritual, pardon me, turning into this like I immediately win the game button, it now resets everybody back to the Stone Age. And one thing that's kind of important is that Zerd is making their land drops. And so I'm like, okay, at least this Heuristic Study is here so that I can start to gain some advantage back, basically. And Zerda literally untaps, plays a Fragmentize, and pays for my Rhystic Study. So I get 0 draws in this situation. And I'm like, oh my goodness, do I get blown out, right? So the Rhystic Study goes to the yard. And it's just absolute nightmare situation for me, right? Kinnan is able to make their first land drop of the game, play a Chromox, get Kinnan right back out. So he's like still kind of cooking, even though he got kind of blown out by the culling. And Sisse earlier had worldly tutored a Selvala, right? So they play this Selvala, they pass the turn, right? Which is generally relatively scary, right? At this point. I proceed to untap and look at my hand, and it's this Breach, and there's some other garbage card in the hand. I can't remember what it was at the time. I think it might have been a land or something. And I'm like, okay, I only have this Breach, and I know Kinnan still has this Flusterstorm, right? Which means that even if I try to get cheeky, I have so few cards in my graveyard that I can get a couple spells deep, but I specifically do not have enough to play Breach, gamble, crack the LED, and like do a bunch of stuff that I want to be able to do, right? And so I get to the point where I go, okay, I can gamble for LED, cast the LED out of my graveyard, and then recast the stupid Rhystic Study in my graveyard. And that is the best line I can come up with at this time. But I have literally, it's either that or just pass the turn and then hope that somehow things miraculously get better in this situation, which they definitely won't, right? So I go through the rigmarole of doing that. I'm very clearly explaining to the table what I'm going to do, right? I'm like, hey, I'm going to play this Breach. I'm going to gamble for my LED. I'm going to use that LED to cast this Rhystic Study, right? Making it very clear what exactly the situation is. So like, I'm going to pass the turn. So I do that, put the Rhystic Study down. Zerda untaps, pays for Rhystic. I think they play Zerda at this point. They pass the turn. Kinnan does a couple quick things. I think I get a single Rhystic Study draw in the entire turn rotation. And Sisse is also starting to get to the point where they're starting to get a little scary as well, right? It goes to me, and I forget why they didn't play the Selvala turn beforehand. I think they might have played a Lotho this turn. They played a Lotho and a Selvala in some configuration. But it gets back to me, and by far, I get one draw in this entire rotation. And that one draw happens to be Necropotence. And this is by far the luckiest thing that happens to me all tournament, for sure. Is just this raw Necro draw after I've been blown out multiple times over the course of this game, including the fact that I go to attack Zerda a second time with the Spongebob because, once again, they're the person with the most lands who got impacted the least by this culling ritual, and I get my Spongebob red blasted, right, which hurt. That was actually the turn cycle beforehand. I forgot to mention that part. So like I'm down a Spongebob, I'm down a lot of things, right, and so I rip this Necro off the top, and I obviously slammed on the table. Yeah, is great. And so I'm able to rip 7 cards, put them in my hand, go from there, right? We go to Zerda's turn. Zerda goes for the win. I think they go to Savine's Reclamation, back the Grim Monolith that is in the graveyard. Kinnan is forced to use the Flusterstorm on it to stop that from winning, and then Zerda goes, fine, I'll just wheel, right? And so I've got a fresh 7 that I got off Necro, so all these cards end up going to exile. It's a lot of tutors, it's a lot of really gas cards, but it wasn't like I didn't lose like 6 or 7 win conditions. It was more like I just lost a lot of really good resources that could have been cool for my next turn, like a Culling the Weak and a Rograk, and I think I lose some win condition at this point, but it's a little fuzzy right now. But I lose some really good stuff at the course of this wheel, right? And it's also revealed that Sisse just straight up wins the game if it gets back to their turn. They pitch like their Oath of Deferi or something crazy like that into the yard, right? So Kinnan untaps, plays a couple rocks. Now that they're recovering a little bit, they actually can make a land drop, et cetera, et cetera. Sisse goes to have their turn, and we get to the point where the one thing I do have in hand, this comes up once again, is Valky. I get to play Valky, take a peek at everybody's hands, look at the answers that I'm going to have to deal with. And realistically, the only thing that I'm seeing that's going to be really problematic is potentially a Legolas's Quick Reflexes out of Sisse. Oh, I forgot to mention the most important thing that happens on this turn cycle. Oh my goodness. The thing I forgot to mention is that Zerda, over the course of this turn, after I played the Necro, wheels and also plays a Dranith Magistrate. That's like the biggest part of this turn cycle. Yeah, my Breach is in my graveyard. It's my quickest way to win the game. And there's a Dranith on the field, right? So it gets back to my turn. Sisei's still got a Savala in play. They got a lot of good stuff going on. I am basically at the point where I'm like, I think I just have to send this as hard as possible. I have to do my best to try and just win the game right now because everyone else is doing a lot more stuff. They also just all got fresh sevens, and Valky is showing me that this is like kind of one of my only opportunities. Now, this is 2 out of 3 times over the course of this tournament that I play a Valky and get a ridiculous amount of information. Yeah, this card overperforms so crazily. So I go, okay, I see what I'm working against right now. 24 into Necropotence. I'm at 28 life. So I leave myself down to 4. I rip a ridiculous amount of cards into my hand. And at this point, the shortest version of the story is that I figure out a crazy line to basically Tainted Pact for Born Upon the Wind. At that point, I have no mana available to me, but then I play a bunch of free spells from hand. I then figure out that I can play a Burgie and then play some spells on top of the Burgie to get a bunch more mana. I go for a super crazy line. I eventually get to the point where I can go and tutor and have a blue mana floating. When I tutor, I go grab Chain of Vapor. I bounce each and every one of my rocks. Once again, I have a Burgie on the battlefield at this point, so I bounce all my rocks back to my hand. I replay all of my rocks, floating a bunch of extra red mana as I go through that process. At one point, I finally get enough mana where I can then, at this point, Savine's Reclamation back the Breach in my hand, because the last thing I do on the Chain of Vapor is bounce the Dranith Magistrate, right? So now I can Savine's back my Underworld Breach. The one thing we realize after the game is that the Sisei player looks at their Legolases and goes, oh my gosh, I could have actually just protected the Dranith with the Legolases, and that would have absolutely blown me out. I don't know really what I could have done at that point. I would have had to really cook, and I don't know if I could have got there, to be honest. But I'm able to specifically get back the Breach, which gives me enough mana to go and find because I think something happened to my Thassa's Oracle, unless I'm mistaken. I think it got exiled over the course, maybe from that during that Necro turn, or at a point earlier in the game. I know for a fact my Thassa's Oracle is gone for some reason. It might have got pitched to something, whatever reason it might be. But we are super deep in this very deep Mnemonic Betrayal line. And so, yeah, I flash back the Breach as I just sort of gave away the ghost there, get enough to Mnemonic Betrayal, brain freeze my opponents before I do it. I basically exile their entire libraries and I assemble some sort of combo from everyone's entire deck, and I'm able to get there, which ended up being pretty crazy, and one of the tightest storm lines I think I've ever navigated. If honest, that is one common theme of the summarization of this tournament, which is just like having to pull insanely tight storm lines out of kind of nowhere. But at this point, I am 3-0 in this tournament, and I'm kind of in disbelief. Now, it's a 5-round cut to top 16 tournament, so I know for a fact that I am locked for top 16 at this point, right? So I don't necessarily care if I win or if I draw at this point. And so I'm kind of like ready to sit down and just take some IDs and then walk away with my time and let my mental recharge. Tales of Adventure, Magic.com has been an amazing partner of this channel for so long. ToaMagic.com has amazing singles. And for all of you cEDH players out there, we know that you want Eternal Magic singles and really good cards, really high quality, those amazing, beautiful foils with an amazing selection of cards. ToaMagic.com is the place to be. Also, with MagicCon Vegas coming up right now, Toa Magic has an amazing feature where you can order cards online and pick them up at location. So for example, if you're heading to MagicCon, if you're heading to any of the SCGs nearby, it is a great way to be able to get your cards and make sure you actually have them for the events you're attending, right? I use this for all the time. They're an amazing service. And once again, the amazing selection of singles is so easy. And even if you're not going to any of these major events, you can still get super quick shipping through toamagic.com. Make sure you use code Comedian for 5% off your order when you're picking up singles at Toa. I cannot stress enough, they have such an amazing inventory. You will not be disappointed. I go into round 4, and the configuration is we have Derevi in seat 1. We have Rogthras in seat 2. We have myself in seat 3, and then we have Rona in seat 4. Rona, the blue-black War of the Spark, March of the Machines commander. Really cool brew by Dan. Very cool to see it multiple times over the course of this tournament. There's a hint. I will see Dan again. And so this is a really interesting game. So we sit down and everyone, the Derevi player, the Rona player, and myself are all in positions where we can take a draw at this point. But our Rogthras player in seat 2 cannot, unfortunately. They also made it very clear they're not really into IDs, and they're really only going to do it if it's like absolutely necessary, and they're very disincentivized to do so. So we're like, great, yeah, let's play some Magic. Super happy to play whatever it is. You know what I mean? I'm already locked for top 16, so for me, I'm just happy to play and maybe get some more points, right? Like, who knows? You could go crazy here, right? So this game is wild. That is literally my first note in the summary of this game. Is this game went long, and this game was insane. Very long game is the exact phrasing I wrote. So I mull to what I would consider, in hindsight, a very ambitious 5-card hand. Basically, I have a Badlands, an Ancient Tomb, a Mana Vault, a Manamorphose. No, I think I drew the Mana Vault later on. So it's Badlands, Ancient Tomb, Manamorphose. I know for a fact those 3 were in there. I have a Vexing Bauble, and I want to say an Intuition, but I don't know if I drew the Intuition later and I had the Mana Vault. So either the Intuition and the Mana Vault were hidden. So basically, I have a hand with several cantrips in it, and my mana's pretty bad, and everyone else snap keeps 7s. And so I'm like, okay, uphill battle. And I think I was a little bit lazy with this mulligan, if I'm being honest, especially if I didn't have the Intuition, but I'm generally at the point where I do not remember if I had the Intuition or not. But it was probably a bad keep on my part. So I do a whole lot of nothing for a really long time, basically. So Derevi has a really crazy start. They just start with, okay, wild growth in the land, and then they do some other acceleration, basically. Rogthras has an even more insane start where they are able to play a basic into an Earthcraft, I think, on turn 1. Or I think by the end of turn 1 or the end of turn 2, they have both of their commanders and an Earthcraft and something else in the battlefield. So they're just absolutely going crazy. I kind of just started whiffing really hard on any sort of action, right? And it goes around the table a couple times. Rona's doing some stuff, but they're not going super crazy. Later, we find out they kept a hand with Mirror Maid in it, but no one played any copyable permanents that were worth copying with Mirror Maid, right? So Derevi's doing a couple things. They play a Ranger Captain and Derevi. They're untapping their lands and stuff like that. So they're doing some pretty decent stuff here. Ranger Captain might come a little bit later, but they have at least Derevi and Agatha's Soul Cauldron, right? So when they go to play Agatha's, I'm sitting here looking at this Intuition in my hand going, oh my gosh, I'm so dead, right? Like I can't even do anything at this point, right? So Rog, who already has what I would describe as a ridiculous amount of mana available to him, end step goes, all right, cool, Thrasios activation, flips over a Seedborn Muse. And we're like, oh, crud. Like, do we even have the answers for the Seedborn Muse right now? They put a second activation in the stack, and it's a 1 ring. And we're like, are you kidding? So, obviously, very bad situation here, right? So, they go to put the Seedborn Muse on the stack. One counterspell is used by either Derevi or Rona, I want to say. And once again, they know I'm pretty BTFO'd at this point, right? And so Rogthras also just has, like, I cannot tell you enough how much in this medium turn span, Rogthras was like interaction, Seaborn Muse, 1 ring, right? Just like a crazy amount of stuff that was just like, I will be attempting to win this game, right? Like just absolute, like we were all laughing about like how nuts these flips were, right? And so they put the Seaborn Muse in the stack. There's some counterspell fighting over the Seaborn Muse, and it's basically like everyone's being really transparent at this point because this is just like the Rogthras was already dominant before the Seaborn Muse became even a concept. Also, there's a Minamo on Rogthras's board, so like if the Seaborn Muse 1 ring sticks, it's 2 1 ring activations on every single person's turn, right? So we're fighting over it, and I'm like, hey, I have this intuition, right? And at this point, I kind of forget how greedy my deck is. But also notably, Rogthras has only put 2 spells on the stack: Seaborn Muse and the counterspell fighting over Seaborn Muse. And Derevi does not have the answer to deal with this at the time. So we are fighting over the Seaborn Muse. It's very clear that it's up to me at this point. And I'm like, my hand does literally one thing, and it plays this intuition. And there's literally an Agatha's Soul Cauldron on Derevi's board. And I'm like, hey, Derevi, is there any world where I can convince you to let me put 2 things in the graveyard and leave them alone? And we basically have a back and forth where I'm like, to be clear, it's not going to be like, Savine's Breach with some stupid thing. Like, I'm not just going to like ask for immunity and then like go win the game, right? So I end up putting a Force of Will into my hand, and I put Savine's Reclamation and Rhystic Study into my graveyard, right? So I'm like, at least maybe I can play Rhystic and like somewhat pretend to survive this game, right? At this point, I also have a Silence in my hand, but I'm not, like, as I said, not really cooking with anything else at this point, and I've just used my intuition for things that intuition should not be used for. Also, there's Graveyard Hate and a Ranger Captain. I'm cooked. And so we go to fight for the Seymour Muse. Rogthras has another counterspell to deal with my Force of Will, and a big part of the reason why this Force of Will sucked so bad was that my only blue card in hand was my Thassa's Oracle. But knowing that I have Mnemonic Betrayal, knowing that I have Brain Freeze Breach, all of those things, I'm at least feeling okay enough that I'm not just throwing away my entire game plan by exiling with Thassa's Oracle. So the Seaborn Muse goes back to being the last thing on the stack. It's very clear none of us have the answer for it. And I look at Rogthras and I'm like, I look at the Derevi player and I'm like, hey, look, I'm so far from jamming on my turn. I have like 2 cards in hand. I'm literally just going to flash back to get this Rhystic Study. Can you please crack the Ranger Captain? Because we are losing to a Seedborn Muse and their board state, but we are really, really losing to a Seedborn Muse, their board state, and a 1-ring. Like, we cannot win that game. It is unwinnable. And everyone's kind of on the same page. Rona 100% agrees with me. So Ranger Captain gets cracked. Plus, Derevi still has the ability to just Agatha's to put another Ranger Captain onto one of their permanents, right? So it's like not even that crazy, even if things go crazy, right? So yeah, they still have literally a Ranger Captain in this turn cycle if they really wanted to, right? And so they crack it. So there's no at least 1 ring. So we're at least like semi-alive, right? So I flash back the Savines to get the Rhystic Study. That's all I do for the turn. Go get the land first. Fun fact, there's a whole thing with Savine's Reclamation where you actually target one thing, and then as soon as the spell resolves, you go get the second thing. Kind of fun, little nuance, little intricacy there for those at home. But yeah, you only have to declare 1 target when you first launch Savine's Reclamation, which is kind of fun. But all that being said, I put a land into play. I'm like, great, we can at least now, specifically, by putting a land into play first, I can hold up my silence and then go into the Rhystic Study, right? So I'm not only just fully tapping out to put a Rhystic into play, but I'm actually getting a land so that I can hold up the silence and have a Rhystic Study in play. We're like, okay, we can actually like cook a little bit. End my turn, Rogthras is like, cool, activate, get a bunch of stupidly good cards, right? Like, just get more interaction in hand. Go to Rona's turn. Rona goes, cool, I'll mirror mage your Rhystic Study. Great. Now we have 2 people who are playing defense right now who have Rhystic Studies. And Rona's kind of looking at me like, yeah, you're not doing much of anything. And I'm like, yeah, for sure, I'm definitely not, right? And so we kind of have this very candid moment where we're like, we're both so behind the other 2 players, right? Because at least with Derevi, they have a Mistfire Village on the board, so one of their spells can be uncounterable. They've also got just repeatable access to Ranger Captain Avios, right? So like, Derevi's not exactly not scary either. To be honest, I thought we were losing, and the only saving grace in this moment was that Derevi just has like a handful of counterspells. To be honest, like, we were very close to being absolutely under the fryer from Derevi at the same time that we were losing to this Rogthras so definitively, right? So Rona and I are like, all right, cool, let's just like do our best to like give each other a couple cards, right? So for the rest of the game, Rona and I just have these stacked hands, right? Because people keep pushing and we keep drawing cards, and we're kind of drawing some stuff, but not a lot of stuff, right? And especially me playing in a greedy deck, I wish I was able to help more than I was able to. So we go through the whole turn rotation. Derevi's just like, yeah, I'm going to move to combat. I'm going to do a little chip here, a little thing there, untap some stuff, do some scary things, but not win. I think they also have a cradle at this point. They're popping off really hard, right? But once again, what we find out afterwards is like they're looking at a handful of interaction. And honestly, I think had they had any tutor in that situation to go grab a meal, we were probably just dead, if I'm being honest. But didn't happen, so we got kind of lucky there, I think. I keep using the word lucky, even though I said only got lucky a couple times over the course of this tournament. But point being, we get some cards in hand. We go into Rogthrast turn, who we're all aware is still very much the problem. They have a ton of mana. They're still activating on everyone's turn, filling up with interaction. And like the interaction's all gas. Like it is all just good stuff. And then going into their turn, one of the first things they rip is a Court of Calling. We're like, oh my goodness, they're just popping off on top. I think we literally made a joke about them hitting Court of Calling and blowing us out already. And we also know they still have a One Ring in hand. They still have another tutor in hand. I believe it was like Invasion of Ikoria. So like a lot of stuff in Rogthrast's hand, right? So we go to Rogthrast's hand and they go untap, upkeep, draw. And I was like, wait, before you go to your main phase, and I look at Derevi and I'm like, we need to crack the Ranger Captain again because we can fight at instant speed over the Court of Calling or whatever it might be. But by letting them go to their main phase, they can present a threat and then flash stuff over the top of it, right? So we need to be able to cut them off in their main phase. We cut off so many resources by doing that, and we make them have to go find a flash outlet right now, right? Derevi completely agrees. They crack their Derevi, which had Agatha's Ranger Captain ability on it. So they crack that. There's a Ranger Captain on the stack. And then proceeds the interaction battle that I want to say lasted 35 minutes. Long story short, Rogthrast puts many very solid attempts to absolutely put us in the ground on the stack over and over again. And 35 minutes later, the stack gets to the point where Derevi has an Archdruid's Charm targeting their Sowing Mycospawn to fight the Seaborn Muse. So that, yes, maybe the Court of Calling resolves to grab their Valley Floodcaller, which they'd done the Court of Calling for 3. So we knew that was basically what was happening. They're going to try and win over the Ranger Captain activations. It's also very clear to us at this point that the amount of interaction drawn between Rona and I means some crazy stuff's about to happen. Derevi, I don't think, has a traditional card draw engine at this time, but they had a decent amount of stuff in hand. They had a decent amount of interaction. Oh, you know what? They have a Fairy Mastermind, right? So that's totally right. I forget that there's actually a point where, this is the detail I forgot. Rona has a Fairy Mastermind, Derevi has a Fairy Mastermind, and Derevi also has a Delny, right? So we're drawing all these cards, and they're also drawing off each other drawing, and Derevi's drawing twice as much of off each other drawing, right? So like literally everyone has like 15 cards in hand. I was like, I knew Derevi had a stacked hand. I can remember why. So as Rogthrast is jamming and jamming and jamming, we are just drawing more interaction, drawing more interaction, drawing more interaction. And by that, I mean everyone else in the pod is drawing more interaction. And I'm still looking at this silence, and I've drawn like 15 cards, and I have legitimately no counter spells. It is like, I know my deck's a little aggressive with them, but I legitimately have nothing. Like to a comedic upsetting degree, right? Rona's using counter spells, Derevi's using counter spells. I'm straight up multiple times in because I at this point, Rona is my life crutch, right? I am legitimately showing them all 15 cards in my hand going like, look, there's no cap here. Like I have this silence and that's all I got, right? And it's just like battle on battle, battle. So I actually never use this silence, right? Which you might be thinking, oh, here comes the win. No. Far messier than that. We get to the point where Rogthrast still has like 4 or 5 mana open up, but they realize that they're going to lose this Seedborn Muse and it's going to be messy, right? And once again, Rogthrast was the only one in the pod who had thought that they did not want to take a draw right at this point. Now, from what it seems like, maybe afterwards they didn't get a draw in the round after this, but we knew that they could afford a draw and then be able to make top 16, which because if you check the records, the year was only a single player who had 12 points, which is 2 wins, 2 draws, who did not make top 16, which is unfortunate for that player. Shout out to them. But so we knew that if they got to 12 points, they'd be fine, right? So we had a conversation about that. And all of us agreed that at this point, with multiple players in the pod having like 15 cards in their hand, there's about 10 minutes left in the round. I could easily go into my turn. I could easily put several win conditions in the stack. I know for a fact with a Ranger Captain under an Agatha Soul Cauldron, I was not doing any winning. And we also found out that Derevi also had a silence in their hand that had not been used yet, and I didn't have to use my silence, right? So we knew the rest of this was just going to be super messy, and realistically, no one was going to win, or everybody was going to throw a bunch of stuff at each other for 15, 20 minutes. We were going to have like a 40-minute stack. So we were like, all right, at this point, are we good to call this a draw? Like it's super messy from here on out because all of us had to feed each other a bunch of cards to stop Rogthras, and now no one's strictly advantaged, so let's just call it a draw. And we end up doing a natural draw at that point. As I said, there's not a lot of time left, so it just made sense to do so. So at this point, 3 wins, 1 draw. I'm at 16 points, and I am at the top of the leaderboard at this point, which I'm playing SpongeBob Turbo. I never thought this would happen. This was very funny. Which wasn't ready for it. Very, very funny. We walk over to our round 5 pod, and it's myself. There's a Godo in first seat, myself. Then we have Blake on Ral in seat 3, and we have Trent on Sisse in seat 4. And we all look at each other and we go, "Hey, you want to not spend a bunch of energy and play Magic right now?" And we're like, "Yeah, that actually sounds pretty cool." So all of us agree that an ID is just a nice little time saver. We would literally be playing Magic for almost no reason. And I lock in seat number 1 going into top 16, which feels amazing. Right behind me, I believe, are Blake and Trent. So the 2 of them lock up the top 3 spots right after me. And Trent and I go and have a really nice dinner at this cool barbecue place down the street. It was awesome. It was exactly what I needed to recharge before top 16. We had an awesome time, got some good food. And yeah, super happy that I ID'd and got a little bit of a break because for some extra context, I drove up to Hartford from Philadelphia. So I woke up at 3:30 that morning, and I was going to have to drive home another 3.5 hours that night. So having a little bit of break, doing an ID feels awesome, and I do not regret a second of it. And I got a good meal, and yeah, had a great time. Into top 16. Before we go any further with this video, first of all, if you've been watching this long and you're still enjoying it, thank you so much. But if I wanted to remind you, if you want to be able to take a wild brew like I did today and do your best with it, you're interested in taking your cEDH game to the next level, you can reach me at comedianmpg@gmail.com or any of the places in my link tree below if you're interested in cEDH coaching. I have dropped my rates recently due to the economic state of the US, basically, because I want these services to be ready and available to a bunch of folks. And ever since I've done so, folks have been really, really positive and receptive to it. I've got a lot of people who are coming back for more stuff because it's just a little bit easier to grab. And little things like that have really made me feel super special doing this. I love coaching, and I hope to keep doing it as long as I can because it's really rewarding. I had one of my coaching clients today say that they went to one of their first events and won the entire thing using a lot of the stuff that we talked about, which is, as I said, like it's my favorite thing as a coach to get messages from my clients talking about how well they've done. And this weekend, they were popping off as much as I was, which feels super, super awesome. But if you're interested in signing up for cEDH coaching, feel free to email me at comedianmpg@gmail.com, or once again, use any of the places in the link tree down below. I have a full breakdown that I'm super happy to send to folks. And if you're interested in that, come check it out. I also might be moving to MetaFi soon. We'll see how that goes. So top 16 was one of the craziest games I have participated in a long time. It was awesome, though, in such a weird, strange way, because it started off so bad for me. I was in first seat, and everyone else snaps off their first or second 7, right? So everyone just keeps 7 card hands. And I'm mulling. And I'm mulling, and I'm mulling, and I'm mulliganing, and I'm mulliganing, and I'm mulliganing until I am down to 3 cards in hand. And when I tell you all that they were literally unplayable hands until that point, I mean that with my whole chest. There was actually one hand on my second 7 that I believe was basically like I would have to lose every single source of mana except for 1 to play a 1 ring on turn 2. And then if I didn't draw a second mana source, I was in a lot of trouble. I specifically would have to have demonic tutored for a 1 ring on turn 2. And it was extremely greedy and it could get blown out by a Mind Break Trap or a Force of Will. And I said, no way, I'm not doing that. Also, the hand, if I whiff on lands, could go nowhere. And I actually ended up checking the top of my library just in case to confirm that with myself. And there were no lands to be seen, right? So even the most keepable hand until that point still would have blown me out of the water. So I'm mulligan down to 3 cards in hand, which unfortunately, the best configuration of that hand was 2 lands and an ad nauseum. So I feel very confident in saying that I am not playing this game. I'm like, okay, this happens sometimes. I don't know what's with me in top pods lately. If anyone remembers the mid-range heaven event, I mulliganed to 2 in the finals. I'm like, okay, I guess this is just my bag lately. But yeah, I'm at 3 cards. Everyone else is at 7s. I'm like, okay, it is what it is. So behind me is Rogrek Thrasios. Then I have the Rona player from round 4. And then there's Kinnan player in 4th seed, different Kinnan than who I played earlier. And so I'm obviously sad as this round starts. And the Rogthras in this pod has an even crazier start than the Rogthras that we played in round 4. They are able to not only get an Earthcraft out, but have a wild growth on this Earthcraft. So they are absolutely cooking with gasoline immediately, like just fully dumping the entire hand ASAP, right? Rona's also having a good start. They get like a turn 2 1 ring down. Kinnan is doing Kinnan stuff in the sense that goes like, hey, Mirror Maid, copy the 1 ring from Rona, and they have a spell skite, and eventually they get a wandering archaic. So Kinnan is cooking pretty hard at this point. Now, Rogthras is pushing super fast. I draw nothing. I think I draw a Ristic Study turn 2. And then I still can't play it, obviously. So I pass the turn. Rogthras is just vomiting mana after vomiting mana after vomiting mana. But the one saving grace is that they are hitting nothing but mana, right? They are flipping off the top, it's more mana. They're flipping off the top, it's more mana. They're flipping off the top, it's more mana. So Rona and Kinnan are still able to sort of keep parity with them by drawing a bunch off these 1 rings. There's also a Fairy Mastermind at one point out of Rona. There's just so many people drawing so many cards, right? Like it is just buck wild at this point, right? This game. And so everyone but me is doing stuff. It gets back to me for turn 3. Rona has a Ristic at this point too. And Kinnan holds up a little bit of mana and passes the turn to me. And I go to play a Ristic because I top deck Tinderwall, right? So either a 3rd land or Tinderwall here or another fast mana source, whatever it might be, gets me to this Ristic that I've drawn. I think it was either turn 1 or turn 2. So I feel very grateful that I'm able to hit this Ristic Study because otherwise I'm literally not playing Magic even slightly whatsoever, right? And so I go, great, Tinderwall into Ristic Study. And Kinnan goes to Swan Song my Ristic, even with the Rogthras position being so insanely ahead. Rona having a 1 ring and a Ristic, I'm pretty sure, or at least just a 1 ring at this point, and them having a bunch of other stuff. And I'm like, hey man, like, look, I'm so blown out of this game. Is this really necessary? As opposed to, holding up answers for the Rograi Thrasios, who is absolutely clowning on this pod. And Rona also kind of backs me up at this point. It's just like, yeah, I think you should be saving this resource for the actual threat of the table. And I'm like, thanks, I appreciate it, because I have 1 other card in hand. I know it's an ad nause, but it's also like not happening anytime soon, right? So Kinnan's like, yeah, no, good point. Like, I'm going to hold it back, right? So they reverse that decision. They're holding the thing. They're holding up more interaction for Rogthras's turn. Rogthras at this point starts pushing a little bit. They keep like advancing their board, playing more mana, advancing their board, playing more mana. They eventually play something that requires that Swan Song to get used, which we're all very grateful it's still available at the table. Rogthras is just like, once again, vomiting value, but they're luckily missing on basically like an Aboro or a Tutor or something like that. That's just going to like put us in the coffin. And they have a few resources at this point, right? My other opponents, because they're now untapping on like their 3rd turn respectively each of this 1 ring. Rona is holding up interaction, passes the turn. It gets back to Kinnan. They have a Wandering Archaic now. They've got and like 1 more turn rotation goes through of this sort of like back and forth of like just holding Rogthras off because they're just vomiting value at once again. Now Rona has a 1 ring on at least 3. Kinnan has a Mystic Remora, and I'm pretty sure at this point is at 3 or 4 counters on it, plus a 1 ring on 3, plus a 1 Archaic, plus a Spell Skite. So just everybody's got so much stuff, and I'm holding on the skin of my teeth by this Ristic Study, right? And I very intentionally, at this point, I've drawn a couple cards off the wrist stick, right? Just to like get me back in this game. And I have the ability to either hold up interaction for this turn cycle, even though I'm so far behind, or to play Bergie out, right? And so I choose to play Bergie, which I cannot stress enough is the thing that is my major pivoting point in this game is choosing to invest in this Bergie and not to like hold up one bad piece of interaction over the course of this turn cycle, right? So we go through, once again, all my opponents are just value vomiting. And at one point, it becomes very clear as we go through the table that like Rogthrust is finally starting to break out of this like stall, but the others are just like have so many cards in hand, right? It gets back to me. I have the Bergie. I play an Ancient Tomb, and at this point, my hand is it's Valley Flood Caller, Culling Ritual, a Rock, and a Final Fortune, right? And I'm like, I guess I don't even have like the right color of mana to Final Fortune, so I actually have to cast spells first to even get red mana to get the Final Fortune if I ever wanted to jam it at this point, right? And so I'm sitting here with a Valley Flood Caller in hand, and I'm like, yeah, I guess if things go absolutely buck wild, I might jam a Final Fortune in here if anybody gives me a window in this scenario in which I would have to, as a turbo deck, fight through a Rhystic, a Mystic, a Wandering Archaic, and a bunch of blue players. I'm like, yeah, sure. This is potentially a thing that might happen at some point, right? And I go to pass the turn, and finally Rogthrast reveals Seaborn Muse. And they go to put Seaborn Muse in the stack. And the conversation at this point is, wow, we really don't have that many counterspells for this Seaborn Muse. And so Rona's looking at their hand and shows what I later find out is a mystical teachings to Kinnan. They're like, hey, if I play this spell, I'm going to go get a removal spell for the Seaborn Muse. You can get a copy of it, and we'll fight over the Seaborn Muse, right? So a bunch of stuff happens with that situation, but one of the things that Rona mentions at this point in the game is they're like, yeah, I actually don't have any interaction here, even though like they're both, Rona and Kinnan have like 8-ish cards in hand, and Rogthrast is like activating multiple times to like get more interaction for this moment, but all of them are kind of like, hey, we have 8 or 9 cards in hand, but we don't have any counter spells. And I'm like, oh, that's weird. This seems like that might be a really good opportunity for me if I'm going to basically send a Hail Mary, which I can only describe the situation as such. And honestly, I don't think I'm really going to go for it here, but it's very obvious based on their reaction to the Seaborn Muse that they really don't have a lot, right? So they're all sort of battling over the Seaborn Muse, and eventually gets to the point where the Seaborn Muse gets countered, and we're about to go into the Seaborn Muse resolves, pardon me, but the Seaborn Muse is removed by the spell that got copied by the Wandering Archaic, and the Kinnan player went and got a Pongify to answer it permanently, and then something else of Rogs got bounced, and it was a whole shebang. But it's like I verbally sort of heard the conversation where the people who have all the interaction at the table are super desperate. And meanwhile, I don't have any interaction. Like I have no stack interaction at this point, but I have these few pieces, right? Still have the Adnals in my hand. And I have, I want to say a breach in hand too. I have something that allows me to, I think it's a breach. And so I'm looking at this scenario here, and my graveyard's not super stocked because I haven't taken any game actions for the majority of this game, right? And I'm looking around, I'm like, I don't know that there's ever going to be a better window, right? These One Ring players are about to untap and crank like 5 cards into a One Ring. And realistically, the odds of me surviving another rotation are so low, right? So low. And I go, okay, I guess let's send it. So I flash in the Valley Flood Caller, which triggers my Bergie, gives me a second red source. And so I go red plus my Badlands, launch the Final Fortune. And it sticks. No one counters it. There's some draws off the Mystic and the Rhystic, right? And so like this line is, I can't stress enough, so risky because I am going into a Wandering Archaic, a Rhystic, and a Mystic. I also very intentionally do not pay for the Wandering Archaic copy of Final Fortune. So if Kinnan wanted to send it right there, there's a chance they could have absolutely gone for it, but they were very clear that they were like, I'm actually so good on, on Final Fortuning right now. So clearly they were super happy to wait for a better setup. And I actually don't know if they could have won in that situation. I think it would be really interesting to have explored their hand at the time, but I don't know if that was a potential there, right? But they very happily deny the Final Fortune. It also wouldn't have mattered because the way Final Fortune works with one cake is like theirs would resolve, right? But then mine would resolve afterwards, which means mine would still take precedence. So I'd still have my Final Fortune turn anyways, right? All that being said, right, so we go into this Final Fortune turn, and I use the last remaining red mana. And what's really interesting here, fun fact for all the viewers out there, because I'm not the active player, my Rhystic Study, or the Rhystic Study triggers were actually happening after my Burgi triggers, right? So because I was the farthest from the active player, my Burgi triggers would resolve before other things. So I actually was able to proactively use the red mana I was making off Burgi to pay for Rhystic, whereas if it was my turn, wouldn't work that way, right? So then we go into my turn. As I mentioned, everyone's like a little bit lighter on interaction, right? And my draw for turn is Valki. Again, MVP of today, Valki. Love this little guy. And so I have a Mox Amber on the battlefield with no legends. And I'm like, well, at this point, I might as well play the Valki because it costs 1 mana, but it also refunds 1 mana. And there's the Burgi. So basically is net neutral, right? Or I might be conflating the games. I might have not had the Mox Amber. I think I just had the Burgi. But the point is I can play the Valki, right? Get a mana back, and then I can still launch this Culling Ritual. And this is a game that has gone on for quite some time. So everyone's got board states. There's Fairy Mastermind, there's Mystic Remoras, there's so many mana rocks, there's Rogrek, there's Thrasios, there's Earthcraft, there's Wild Growth. There is a lot. I think it ends up being 24 permanents on the battlefield with mana value 2 or less that are non-lands, right? So I launch Valki. I get perfect information on everyone's hand, and nobody's got a counterspell. Nobody's got anything. I am then able to launch the Culling Ritual. The Culling Ritual sticks. I have to give a couple people draws. And then I, with like 20 something mana, fire off my Adnaz. Adnaz eats Mind Break Trap. And I deal with that there. And basically at this point, I go through a rather convoluted breach line into an intuition line, into a whole thing where I'm still going through this breach line. I'm paying for the right spells with the Wanderer Kick to go through the line. I unfortunately also have to Diabolic Intent to sack my Burgi, which it makes my lines a whole lot harder. And the fact that I have to basically play through a Rhystic Study a lot harder. I still have 24 mana, right? But at this point, I'm genuinely chugging through this mana very aggressively. And I get to a point where I fire off an Intuition. The Intuition basically sets me up where I can either A, use the Voice of Victory that's in my hand that I've drawn at one point, or B, I can play a Defense Grid so that they can stop interacting with my piles, execute a really tight breach line, and I end up getting there. They make me play it out, obviously, because it's semifinals match, and you definitely want to do that. And I end up going through this entire breach line, paying for the right things for Wanderer Kick, paying for the right things for Rhystic Study, and get there at the very end, which was pretty sweet. Very happy with how that went, for sure. And it went pretty sweet. So I clutched victory out of the titanium jaws of defeat in this situation, in which my opponents are way ahead of me in this situation. I went for a Hail Mary Final Fortune. I literally looked around and was like, all right, guys, blow me out. It's fine. I'm super happy to lose here. And it stuck, right? And I definitely got quite lucky in that situation. The finals are me in first seat. We have Ral in second seat, piloted by Blakey, who just won SCG Orlando, right? So obviously doing very well with this Ral deck. Now they've, I think, won 2 tournaments, top forward this one. Very, very solid there. There's Thrasios and Timna, piloted by Jorman, and Rogrek Thrasios by Bob, there with Rog Thras in fourth seat. This is another situation where everyone snaps off 7s, and I only mulled a 5 this time. But I'm on the play, and I figure, let's just do the thing, you know? And I keep a 5 that's 1 land, Ignoble Hierarch, Mystical Tutor, Culling the Weak. I'm going to go put an Adnaz on top of my library if I draw a land or if I draw something that makes mana, right? Turn 1, draw Simian Spirit Guide, and I go, okay, we're doing this thing, right? So I play the Mana Dork, pass the turn. Ral in seat 2 gets a little bit of mana going on. Very clear that they're going to have Ral plus the ability to go for it turn 2. Jorman in seat 1 just plays, I think it's Esper Sentinel Mana Dork, passes, or Jorman in seat 3, pardon me. And then Bob in seat 4, I think plays Rog and something else and passes it up to me. So I'm like, hey, let's do this thing, right? So my upkeep, I launch the Mystical Tutor and it sticks. Very happy. Go put Adnos on top of my library. Now, at this point, Jorman makes a comment to Bob. So our TNT player to our Rogthrast player in 3rd and 4th seat goes, oh, why didn't you mental misstep the Mystical Tutor? And at this point, I think they're kind of messing with me. They're friends of mine. I'm expecting it to be kind of a blowout situation, right? And so I kind of pause here. And I definitely punted at this point because my instinct was to be like, well, if there actually is a mental misstep in hand, like, let me know and I'll change my game plan here, right? Because basically, if I go for this win at this point, I am sacking my only mana dork. I'm down to a single land. I have no land drops for turn because I just gave up my land to put Nana's on top of my library. But then I'm like, I don't really have another good option here, right? And I don't really have something great to say to doing it here. Now, I think I sort of panicked at this point. It's the finals. I'm a little sleep deprived. And I will admit this was one of my less fantastic moments. And so I just go, I think it's a bluff, and I send it. I sack the Ignoble Hierarch to the Culling the Weak, and I then immediately see the mental misstep. And my spell gets countered, and now I'm down to a tropical island and an Adnos in my hand and a silence, and basically nothing left to do with it. So, oops. My bad. So then I go and pass the turn. Ral untaps, starts doing Ral things. Jorman has a Force of Will for one of his spells. It gets passed to Jorman. So TNT stops Ral. Jorman untaps, plays a couple things, develops the mana a little bit, passes the turn. Same thing with Rogthrast. They play a land, pass the turn. Goes back to me. I untap. I do nothing. I pass. We then go to another turn by Ral. He puts a couple spells in the stack and then fires off a Wheel of Fortune. And I'm like, oh, good. I might see a second land. Like, I can actually get back in this game. This is sweet, right? In response, Jorman playing TNT blows up the Ral. And we go into Jorman's turn after everyone gets a fresh 7 from the wheel. And, people definitely had some good stuff in their hands. And we go into Jorman's turn. And very quickly, he puts a Voice of Victory onto the stack. And all of us kind of look around. Rogthrast is kind of like humming and hawing about what they're going to do. And they fire off a Worldly Tutor, which we thought they might have had an answer, but they fired off Worldly and put, I want to say, a Spell Seeker on top of their library at this point, because obviously they wouldn't be able to do it after the Voice of Victory resolves. But I have nothing for the Voice of Victory, and neither does Ral, which is crazy too, because like I was looking at my hand post wheel and I had 3 lands and I had enough to play a Voice of Victory next turn, and then the turn after that just go for Oracle Consult. So the wheel was really good to me, right? So TNT's Voice of Victory resolves, and he's thinking for a second. He goes, oh, okay, cool. And then neoforms his Mana Dork into Thassa's Oracle, and then, actually doesn't neoform. He pitched the neoform to the original wheel. He yelled Domri's calls for a Thassa's Oracle, plays the Thassa's Oracle, fires off Demonic Consultation of the tap. None of us can do anything because there's a Voice of Victory, and we go, okay, GG's. So yeah, just kind of got wheeled into the win. So it happens sometimes. Wheels are tough. But at the same time, like, your Storm deck, you're going to play wheels. All right. And also the wheel almost gave me the game too. So crazy stuff there from this finals match. Definitely a wild roller coaster. But also, honestly, my first loss of the tournament. And for bringing a deck that was kind of sleeved up as a bit of a meme, I'm not disappointed with it. It ended up being a super crazy time. Super happy with how I executed a lot of the storm lines in the day, right? Like, that was definitely the choke point for a lot of these things. I'm going to say this as the disclaimer for this video. Spongebob is not going to be a tier 1 archetype. There are other commanders that can play 5-color Turbo Nas in a very effective way. I highly suggest not playing this deck. However, if you would like to use some of the lessons from this deck, some of the pieces to play a different 5-color Turbo option, I highly recommend. I think it's a really tough time to play the deck at 100%. But as I've been saying for a couple weeks now, there is a real benefit for putting win conditions on the stack and genuinely going fast, putting wins in the stack, sending it is still working, right? So yeah, there's a lot of conversations about how we're in mid-range hell, but realistically, half of the finals decks were decks that were just going for it, right? It was Ral Storm and my 5-color Turbo deck, right? So I think that there is a lot more space. There's a rock, paper, scissors in this format, and we're starting to see what happens when one archetype pushes out the others, right? It ends up being a case where there is counterplay to what's going on right now. So for those who are, maybe a little bit concerned about the mid-range tendencies, just don't. Just do something else, right? Put your Italis, your Rals, your 5-color Turbo decks, right? Push the boundaries, see what happens. And you never know. You might end up going almost undefeated with Spongebob. But yeah, I feel very proud of the performance. Definitely felt really good to take this deck that's obviously a bit of a joke, but also do really, really well with it. And it ended up being a really fun time. I had a great time playing this deck. I definitely had a good time, flexing a bit of turbo muscles when I've been playing a lot of mid-range in the past little while. So felt pretty good to get out there and just put some Nazas and Necros and Breaches on the stack again. Some cool stuff. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have any questions, concerns, thoughts about the course of this tournament, the deck itself, any things like that, some things you might not understand from some of the interactions here today. As I mentioned, I was over 24 hours without sleep by the time I started taking most of these notes. So forgive some of the details there if they're a little messy. And thanks to Cal for editing probably my longest video in a very long time, with maybe not the quickest turnaround for them. But that's the story of how I almost went undefeated with SpongeBob SquarePants and cEDH. Thank you all for watching. I'll catch you next time. Peace.